Changing my voice. This video is about what happened to Los Angeles, California. Okay, so Los Angeles wasn't always there, right? People moved in there and they tried to establish the city and they built on that city. And it was mostly whites, Jews, and LGBT people, probably white heavy, when it comes to the establishment of Los Angeles. Pretty straightforward. Now, because of things that were going on in the country, right? Segregation, because of the race relations and the gender relations, LA, before the gangs started kind of cracking down on the racist mobs, was not that great of a place. There's no reason to think it was, right? People were being treated unfairly. There was a lot of white racism, and there was a group called the Spook Hunters, as the story goes. And they would go after people of color, especially black people, and the gangs would fight with them, as the story goes, right? The gladiators, the businessmen. So we can say with certainty, because of this, that there's an overwhelming amount of evidence that Los Angeles was not that great until gangs, okay, and the remnant of the Black Panthers, maybe the Brown Berets, what have you, not that I agree with them about everything, mind you, until they clashed with the racist groups. So it was like the satanic racist cesspool, where some people are getting money, some people are doing a little something in, entertainment, what have you, but it was still a racist cesspool. And the only kind of get back, the only kind of breathing room people had was because the gangs and various organizations, and I imagine the NAACP, had they put their 2 cents in there, were clashing with these people over the streets. There was community discussions, what have you. So, even though it's rather unfortunate, it's rather sad that came to that. What happened next, right? What happened next is you had various black and Hispanic people and other races there, and poor white people, certain types of them, who were starting to have a sort of pluralistic. By that I mean there's different cultures kind of somewhat separated, but they're coexisting in a multicultural setting. And there was also a degree of it being a melting pot. By that I mean what people are doing, we're doing, we're rubbing off on each other to some degree, right? Black and Hispanic teens and people in their early 20s were dressing in a similar way. Okay, the blue rag, right? The blue bandana became popular, what have you. And so as they're kind of coexisting and they're getting along pretty well, okay, and there's something that was taking place called white flight, where they're moving out to the suburbs, places like Orange County, what have you, and they're starting to stick up their nose and they're starting to plot their revenge. Now, some of them had plotted this thing from the start to the finish, is what the evidence shows us. But some of them, they weren't so hip, they weren't so in the know, and they wanted revenge. And between the two, they started plotting on these communities, right? And so they started flooding these communities with crack cocaine almost immediately. And there was other things going on, right? There's so many things. I don't know everything that was going on. No, I don't think anybody does. But I know that there were major events that were taking place, major processes that were causing a lot of strife. And they were doing it in the prisons, in the county jails. They were doing it in various locations, the juvenile hall system. They were making sure it played out a certain way. They were doing it on the streets. They were doing it in the job markets. They were pitting them against each other. So there started to be a degree of racial strife. Now, a lot of you might say, well, I know all this stuff, but you're not appreciating what happened here spiritually speaking. What was going on there? Well, mixed in there, you had various African tribes, various Hispanic groups and tribes, from their indigenous roots. They were kind of expressing themselves, right? The heart of their people, right? The heart of these peoples were expressing themselves. And the bell that rings the loudest was, the warriors, okay? The warrior, the heart of a warrior, right? So to whatever degree, they were warriors. These weren't perfect people. No, again, these were not perfect people. But there was some kind of, you might say, residual effect, some semblance of their indigenous roots before. And that was creating a certain effect. And it was also there in the females, where they receive a warrior to some degree, the kind of the beautiful woman receiving a warrior, the Pocahontas effect, if you will, this idea of a beautiful princess or a beautiful woman from various indigenous groups. Okay, they were showing through as well. Now, let's look at what happened here up to this point here. So before that, there was some semblance of that, but it was utterly trampled and polluted and contaminated by the racist cesspool that was going on, that people who weren't gang members were not going to solve by themselves. And I'm not saying that gangs are a good thing. I'm not saying that. But part of this kind of deal with the devil that they made, that blew up in their face, mind you, but also brought a little bit of, it shed a little light on the situation, was that they were going to kind of play ball with the satanic cults, and they formed these gangs. And they are formed in the Greek tradition, Masonic tradition, and they were clashing with these white hate groups who were part of the same secret society system, really, same clandestine group. The clandestine or the surreptitious activities of the state had created these white hate groups, and they created these street gangs. And they wanted to guide it along the way. Now, the details of that is not what this video is about. I don't know all the details of that. But what I do know is that, again, the spirit before like, the gangs spring up, especially like in the 80s, when the crack hits really hard. It was, before that, the 80s, right, the spirit was very evil and toxic and not worth having. So if you look at it as a prophet, you would say, that LA was a satanic, very clearly satanic place. In the 80s, they started, around that time, they started to push back, right? 70s, 80s. Okay, and in the process, we saw some residual effects from people who had heart, indigenous people who had heart, to various degrees in the secular sense, at least, to say the least, right? What I mean by that is they're not in the divine order of God, but they have heart nonetheless, and that heart would have allowed them to receive the Messiah. We'll say perhaps would allow them to. Now, notice they're making it harder for me to talk because they know I'm right. Okay? And this is just the evolution of that satanic cesspool. Because as they push back, they start getting sabotaged. Fast forward to 2015 or so, we see a lot of gentrification taking place. Now, there was gentrification before that, but it really starts turning up around 2015, 16, 17, right? We see this massive wave of gentrification. 2026, this is the year that we're in now. Massive gentrification. And what's happening, right? The dating is ruined. The racial qualities of the people there across the board are ruined, especially privileged people who think it's smart to do it. And we look at them as complete scum. Everyone resents them for ruining the economy, so on and so forth, and not having a fair and effective, economy and financial process, economic process. So they start really ruining it. So when we see this white Jew and LGBT supremacy spirit, it creates a satanic cesspool. When we see the pushback, there's, life, it starts to look, it's looking up, right? 80s, 90s, we're leaving segregation more and more, and things are getting better. And then here comes the satanic cesspool, and a lot of it takes place in the suburbs and in rich areas in the city, where they plan with the tech sector, with big pharma, with the military industrial complex, with the law firms, with the various government groups and social clubs and corporations. They planned to kind of reinstate their satanic authority, which doesn't allow for any freedom at all. Now, I went way over time explaining this, and I was going to start talking about the economy too, but I'm out of time here, so let me just really quickly recap the key parts of this video that I meant to really emphasize. Number one is, before the 70s or so, you had a satanic cesspool in the Los Angeles area, right? From when the settlers really start making it a city to about the 70s. Satanic cesspool, irredeemable garbage, even during the 60s, is very, very unfortunate. When the gangs start pushing back more effectively, when they really coalesce, when they really get it together, and they start beating up these hate groups and kicking them out of the neighborhoods, okay, that's when we start seeing life really start to shine, right? The best music comes like in the 90s, right? The R&B, the best rap comes in the 90s, right? And there's a lot of people confused about this, but if you compare the early hip-hop stuff, it's kind of cheesy and corny. It's like Freemason garbage. But when you see the gangster rap, they kind of move away from the Masons, that cheesy frat-like thinking, and we see a lot more potent sort of warrior raps and a lot more clever gangs, like it's gangster versus it's cheesy. Now, as we get the hip hop in that era too, it's more sophisticated than the gangster rap. So we start to see that art is increasing. The spirit that's closer to the spirit of God starts showing itself. Okay, relationships start being more potent and meaningful. These very potent love songs start coming out. Now, what stopped that? What stopped that was white, Jewish, and LGBT culture. They came back with their frats and their corporations, etc. Okay, now the poor whites who had assimilated into that environment, after the gangs start pushing back, they start being some of the coolest whites in all of human history. Okay, why? Because the way is not through white culture. It's not through Jewish culture. It's not through LGBT culture. There was churches all throughout American history, and it was a satanic cesspool. And these churches have various links, like the Klan, to various hate groups. The Klan was made up of church membership, of church people. But when you see people say, no, forget that nonsense, okay? What you're doing isn't just. And they start pushing back, even though they weren't in the divine order of God. The cultures that were created, the satanic cesspool, were so toxic and evil that we start seeing a much better environment. So the answers to the problems of the world aren't in the churches, mosques, synagogues. They're not there. It's in justice. And it's in having a sound economic rate. We'll speak on this briefly. I'm way over time. Let me just end by saying this. Where when I recommend the top 21% or top 30%, there's some argument. I haven't pinpointed the exact percentage. It's something we need to discuss and ask ourselves, what do we think is fair as a group? Okay? But it's a progressive tax. Progressive, meaning that if you're barely scraping by in the top 30%, you pay much less than the richest person in the top 30%. That part is key there. Thank you.